I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the country that we're currently residing on. And it's great to see the number of people who are engaging with this seminar, and it's across the whole of Australia and all the different states and territories. So I'd like to acknowledge all our ancestors across this great land, all of our elders and leaders of our communities. And also we're doing this for, our emerging leaders as well. To make sure that they get an education where they see themselves connected to the learning and teaching of mathematics in particular, supporting who they are, but also understanding what maths means to them from their own cultural perspective. The seminar, as Linda has been saying, was really started off from our conference in 2020, which is supposed to be in Yirrkala, which is in Arnhem Land. And unfortunately we had to postpone that because of COVID. And you can all appreciate that for many remote communities, the COVID threat was a very serious one that couldn't afford to let loose in these communities. So they rightfully stopped people from coming to those communities and continue to do so at this point in time. So as Linda said, we'll keep you informed about whether we are able to have that as an Yirrkala. But what we're doing in the meantime is actually having this online conference, and we're still trying to follow the theme that we had, which is Ni Wanana Ni Jamamiri Nangana, which means speak it, you create it. And what we're trying to do, I worked with my aunties up there to try and figure out what we want to say. And fundamentally what that means for us is that we want Aboriginal kids to be able to learn in their first language or in the language they're reviving or things like that. So their own language we want them to learn in. And the reason that that's really important is that all concepts, all our knowledge, our philosophy is connected to language. So if we lose a language and we lose that level of knowledge as well, and that's going to affect Australia. If we don't keep the diversity of ideas in Australia, then we're going to limit our capacity to innovate in Australia as well. So this is fundamentally important for us. So to actually achieve that, we actually used a metaphor that's from Yirrkala. It's associated with the Gama festival, and it's around the saltwater freshwater mixing. And this is the way they viewed their bilingual two ways learning up at Yirrkala. And the way they see it is they used a metaphor of freshwater, saltwater coming together at a particular place, where the saltwater was the knowledge that come from overseas, and the freshwater was the knowledge that existed in this country, on this land. So when they come together, they don't change into something else, but they respect each other's existence. But when they do come together, they actually create a space where new life emerges. So we want to get into that space where new connections and life emerges within our education. So the way we planned the conference was to actually look for people who are talking in both of those places. And then from doing that, we're looking at how they actually connect. So we're going to have people who will talk from that saltwater perspective, from the knowledge of the Western way of seeing mathematics and what the best practice is there. We're also going to see the freshwater perspective, where we're looking at drawing on cultural knowledge and their connection to mathematics. And I suppose what I'm trying to ask you to do is that when we're doing this, is that when you're going through this, look for those connections, look at how they come together. Because we're also part of the metaphor, there's an ebb and flow in between. So that means that people are situated all the time in between these two spaces and looking at how these connections work. So you should see how the talks fit within that context. I just want to reiterate that there is the Q&A button on your screen. Sometimes it's at the bottom, sometimes it's at the top, but it's somewhere there. So if you want to ask a question any time during the talk, you click on there and type it in. After each talk, we'll have a short Q&A session that'll be curated by Katie Morris, and she will go through some of them. And unfortunately, we can't do all of them during that period, but we will get back to you via email, after this at some point in time. I better move on because I'm probably running out of time already. I'd like to introduce a new speaker, which is our first speaker, which is Deb Carmichael. So Deb Carmichael is talking about small shifts and big gains. So within the maths classroom, what can you change, make those small changes to get you those big gains in education? So Deb Carmichael has taught mathematics for over 25 years across all secondary year levels and in a variety of contexts. She has held head of the department roles and senior executive roles. Deb is now a senior advisor at Independent Schools Victoria, working in the Development Centre. This allows her to use her experience, ideas, understanding of current research and passion for mathematics teaching and learning to engage and work with fellow educators. So I'd like to hand over to Deb, and I hope you enjoy our first speaker.
I am just
Deb, can I just get you to unmute yourself?
I thought I had, sorry. Is that all right now?
Perfect, thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Chris, for the introduction, and thanks, ATSIMA, for inviting me to be here today. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Boonwurrung people, and the rains have just started here, so hopefully it won't get too heavy and you'll be able to hear me throughout this presentation. So as Chris said, small shifts, big gains is really just about small adjustments that we can make in teaching that can have a big impact on student learning. And I just wanted to share some strategies and things that I've tried in my classroom that I found to be really successful. I can get my slideshow to progress. So I'm going to share these 5 strategies with you today. The first is enhancing discussion, using the textbook differently, all response systems, hinge questions, and putting work up around the room. Now, kind of ambitious, 5 strategies in 20 minutes, but I think we'll be able to do it. And some of the things that I share today will just affirm what you're already doing in your classroom, or maybe they'll just remind you of an idea that you used to use and haven't tried in a while. And hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 things that are new that you might want to take away and try with your classes. When I was thinking about what I wanted to share today, I was thinking of these 3 criteria. First of all, is it learnt? Because sometimes my best teaching plans, when I thought it was going to be this fantastic lesson, would just fall flat and didn't reach the students in the way that I wanted it to. So I wanted to talk about strategies where we can really understand what students are learning and what they're getting from it. Is it evidence-based? Meaning, is there some good research backing the strategy? Because I thought, well, then it's got a really good likelihood of working in my classroom. And the so what, now what is just asking that question, are these strategies that are going to help me to plan my next steps in teaching? So we better get started. The first thing I wanted to share with you is about enhancing discussion in the classroom. In my dream classroom, I would ask a really interesting question. The students would think very deeply about it, and then they would bounce ideas off of each other. But it wasn't always the case. In fact, not often the case. It's sometimes hard to get that discussion happening within a maths classroom. John Hattie in Visible Learning says that on average in a classroom, teachers do 70 to 80% of the talking. So it's really not giving us good insights into what the students know or understand or are interested and curious about. By having a lot of discussion in the class, I found that it would help me to understand what students knew, but it also helped them to practice using mathematical language in a sophisticated way, which is a really important skill. So the data that I'm showing you on this slide is from a classroom observation that I did for a teacher who was curious about the types of questions they were asking in class. So they wanted an audit of question types. And you can see from this slide that there was a lot of closed questions, that yes, no, that single answer response. and not many that gave the opportunity for students to really talk about their understanding and their curiosities. That same teacher asked, "Is this all right?" 35 times during the lesson, and "Is that okay?" 18 times. And it made me think about, what's my default? What are those my go-to phrases? And I used to say a lot, "Are we okay with this? Does this make sense?" Or just "all good?" And you get a couple of nods from students and you might get a smile here and there, but it wasn't giving me some rich information about what they understood. And so I thought about some ways and researched some ways that I could improve that discussion in my classroom. The first one is based on Project Zero's thinking routines. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of these and used these in your classroom. This routine, See, Think, Wonder, is a really nice, simple, structured activity that gives every student in the class a say. You know, they can all contribute in some way. So with this graph, I would start by saying, what do you see? What do you observe? What's going on? And then, what do you think? What's this about? What is it telling us? What do you observe here? And then finally, what do you wonder? What questions could we ask? What are some things that we might explore from this data? Another one I really like from Project Zero is the old Think, Pair, Share. It gives students that opportunity to think about their ideas, test them out with somebody else, and then share them with the class as a whole. I think we've all seen that question who has their hand up even before we finished answering or asking a question. So this way, for those students that are perhaps not so quick to respond, but still have something really interesting to contribute, they can gather their thoughts and test it out before sharing it. Another one that I really like from there is Connect, Extend, Challenge as well, because it gives students a chance to connect back with something from their prior knowledge. So I might ask them, you know, when have you seen something like this before? Or what mathematics that we've done does this remind you of? The Project Zero Thinking Routine Toolbox has loads of thinking routines. Their advice, though, is to just pick one and try it out over a couple of weeks. The idea is to make it routine for students and for them to get better at using it. Melinda said, the presentations will be available, so you'll be able to find those links if you want to have a further look. The graph came from New York Times, What's Going On with This Graph site, and they have loads of different graphs with lots of interesting data, so you can usually find some things that are really interesting for kids to have a look at. My second strategy or second idea around discussion is about planning good questions, because I found if I went into class without really thinking up some good questions to ask, I would fall back into those closed ones. These came from a site called 100 Questions That Promote Mathematical Discourse, and they really do have 100 questions. So there's quite a lot to choose from. And I found it was really helpful in my teaching to just at least pick out a couple that would elicit more than a one-word answer and really get students talking about what they understand and what they know. The second strategy that I wanted to share today is around using the textbook, because textbooks are a fantastic resource. They are full of so much good material. They are put together by some very, very clever people. But I felt like I was just using them in one way. I would teach a lesson, assign questions, teach a lesson, assign questions, and repeat, repeat, repeat. So I wanted to explore some other ways that I might take advantage of this resource that I had in front of me. One of my favorite mathematical educators, Dan Meyer, he did a TED Talk quite a few years ago now, but it's still so relevant. He talks about teachers and textbooks just being less helpful. His talk was about the fact that our textbook questions just give kids all the information right up front. There's nothing to explore or to question. And then often they're led through to a solution in a set of steps through the questions that get asked. So being less helpful might mean taking a question from your text and taking out a bit of information. And you might ask the students, what kinds of things could we investigate here? You know, we might look at that particular question and say, what's the minimum and maximum height that that kite might fly? And ask them what they might think about. Because in real life, when they're solving problems, we don't often have all of the pieces of information that we need. And that practice of learning how to think about what might be helpful can be a really, really good exercise. Textbooks also have really fantastic images, particularly in the lead into a new chapter or a new topic. So sometimes I would project a picture from the text and just ask the students to look and see, what might this be about? What mathematics is represented here? So if you have a look at this picture of traffic, maybe it's about statistics, maybe colors of cars, or it might be speed, distance, and time, although they don't really look like they're traveling very quickly here. It could be about networks or pathways. But you know, if you give that to the kids, they can come up with so many ideas, and then it really gets them curious and connecting math to the real world. Textbook questions are always really rich as well. There's so many to choose from and some really good thinking questions. I think textbooks have come such a long way in their development of practice materials. But I felt like I was using them the same way all the time. A colleague shared with me that what she would do is in her class, she would get students to work on the more difficult problems. That way, if they needed to talk to a peer, if they needed to ask a question, or if she needed to stop and just address something that was perhaps a sticking point for a lot of students, she could do that in class time. Then the students could go home and do the fluency work where they could build up their skill, their speed, and their accuracy. And they weren't getting to this point where, oh, I've done all these questions in class and I feel really great about this skill, but now I'm getting a bit stumped and I don't have anywhere to go for help, and then I'm losing my confidence in my ability. So I tried that, and I really liked having that time in class to work on things that were a little bit tougher for the kids and being able to just give them a little bit of scaffolding to help them along. Also, with the text questions, I could differentiate by asking students to just skim through the questions until they got to a point where they were challenged. And that way they weren't spending a whole lot of time on things they could do very easily, but get down and actually spend some time on those questions that provided them with a little bit more challenge. Textbooks also have really great worked examples. So sometimes I would assign for homework for the students to read through the worked examples as some flipped learning. And then when they came back into class, it meant that they could spend more time doing. And I could just answer questions and work with smaller groups or individuals. And lastly, on the questions, I found that I often told students at the end of a test to say, okay, you've got 5 minutes, you know, check your answers, see if you're correct. And students wouldn't have practiced that as a skill. You know, we can't expect them to be good at knowing how to correct questions if they don't ever do it in class time. So instead of getting them to flip to the back of the book and just check their answers, I would ask them to pick out a question and practice. How could you do this in a different way to be sure you're correct? How might you revisit your steps and make sure that you follow that process correctly? Not for all of them because it's time consuming, but I just think once in a while gives them then that confidence to know how to do it when they're under a little bit of pressure. And the last bit I wanted to say about the textbook was just about giving students a really luxurious amount of time to solve some tougher problems. Guy Claxton refers to this as split screen thinking, this idea that on one screen you're solving your problem, and on the other screen you're really reflecting and thinking about your own learning and your process. So what did I recognize as being important here? What was my first step to solving the problem? How did I feel when I got a little bit stuck? How do I know that I'm correct? And just getting them to think and have that time to think about their process as they go along and work through a particular problem. And of course, it is just such a great strategy, I think, to throw out some really challenging problems now and again to everybody, because it's so important to normalize struggle in the classroom. Dan Finkel, another famous Dan maths educator that I really like, says that a lot of students graduate from high school believing that it should take 30 seconds or less to solve a maths problem. And if you can't do that, then, you know, maths maybe isn't your thing. And that's such a shame if students feel that way. So I think introducing problems and getting them to work on problems in class that really pose challenges is such a wonderful thing we can do for our kids. My third strategy is all response systems. So instead of my, is that okay, couple of nods, it's a way of doing a temperature check of the whole room. Traffic lights, you can give the kids colored cups, red, yellow, and green. Or I used to just create some laminated colored discs and I would give each student a set. And then at a point in my teaching, I would stop and say, you know, show me what traffic light are you on? Green meaning go right ahead, everything's going well. Amber, not so sure, maybe slow down. Maybe another example might be helpful here. And red meaning, oh, I'm really confused, I'm not getting this at all. Now, a lot of high school students aren't going to want to flash up a red light in front of everyone and say, I don't get this. So you can turn it around and just say, how's my teaching? And they're more than happy to answer that question, but it's still giving you that same information. I would also use traffic lights during a lesson so students could just have their traffic light on their desk, and when they were working, I would know if they were on red and they need me to come and help them, rather than sort of sitting there for ages with a hand up. If they're on amber and I can't get to them to help, I could pair them up with somebody who was really getting it. And if it's green, I could just go around and just check that they're working at that appropriate level of challenge for them. Thumbs up, thumbs down, it's another great all response system, very easy, very quick to just do that temperature check. And mini whiteboards are brilliant. I loved using those in my classroom, just getting kids to all respond to a question, hold up their board, and I can quickly scan around the room and see who's got it, who might need some help, who I might pair up together a bit later on. And the other really nice thing about them is that sometimes that quiet student who doesn't often contribute in class, and you can see, they've really got this one, I'm going to ask them to explain their thinking, and just helps to give a bit of boost of confidence. So if I was going to use my all response system, I would probably pause at this time if we were all in the same room and ask you for a thumbs up or a thumbs down at this stage. Now, those all response questions are great for just knowing that perhaps things aren't going as well as I had hoped, but they don't really tell me how to fix it. And that's where hinge questions just add that extra layer of information. A hinge question is really about this idea of having a multiple choice question where each question points to a different misconception that students might have. Wiliam is really big on these, and that's where I first heard them. So in my Pythagoras question, for example, here, if I had a lot of students choose A, I would know that they're missing that square root step. And I know exactly what I need to correct at the time, rather than just having to wait until I do an exit ticket or wait till I go and see what students are working on in the class. The other nice thing about hinged questions is that you can have more than one correct answer, and it can lead to a really good discussion. So for example, I might have fractions. I might have a simplified fraction and an unsimplified fraction that are both correct. And we can talk about what might be the preferred solution. So my last strategy I wanted to share today is about getting work up around the room. And if you have whiteboards up around your room, you can get students up and working on them. They seem to love being at the whiteboard. If not, just large sheets of paper taped up around the room can work just as well. What I liked about it is that I could scan around the room and I could see what the students were doing. I could allow students to work together so they could talk through their thinking processes, and then allow them to have a gallery walk, to walk around and see other students' really good work, because sometimes they don't get to see what alternative solutions look like. And a great way to sort of highlight and just notice what students are doing, rather than having to wait until you get around to every desk. So if I think back on those 5 strategies, were they helping me to know what the students were learning? Absolutely. I feel like they were ways of getting an insight into the student's point of view and being in their shoes for a minute. Is it evidence-based? Yes, I really tried to rely on research because I felt like that was a really good way of feeling confident that it would work in my setting. And so what now what? Yes, they did allow me to see what I might do next and what might be the most effective next step to take to help students learn. So Kirsty's going to run a quick poll for us. And the question is, what might you use with your classes? And I think it's set up so that you can select more than one. Might it be encouraging dialogue, using the textbook in different ways, all response systems, or hinged questions, or perhaps getting work up around the room? What do you think might work in your setting? Now, I can't see the poll results because I think I need to stop sharing. There we go. Lots for encouraging dialogue. And I do highly recommend the Project Zero. It's just a really fantastic source of ways of getting everybody involved in that conversation. So thank you so much for allowing me to share with you today. It's been really enjoyable. And I'm going to turn over to Katie, who's looking at questions, if there are any. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Just while people, if you want to put some questions in for Deb, now's your chance if you haven't done so already. And while people are doing that, Deb, I have a question for you. I really loved all those strategies. I really agree with you about the response, particularly the response one, the instant response, and the use of mini whiteboards, which I used to love doing in the classroom because it does give you that instant feedback. But I'm not sure how that would work when, you know, COVID times, when teachers are, you know, teaching kids online or remotely. So which one of those strategies would you suggest would work best for online or remote learning?
Look, I think the mini whiteboards can still work in terms of if kids just have a bit of paper, you can get everybody in your class to write a response and then just hold it up to the screen. But I want to come back to those Project Zero thinking routines. I think they work really well online. And I've been talking to teachers who've been using those a lot, because sometimes when you've got your whole class online, you've got those kids who feel confident, they're speaking up and, you know, perhaps being quite vocal. And those ones that are a little bit quieter, using a thinking routine just gives those students that opportunity to contribute, whether it's through the chat or just giving them a minute to think before you start taking responses from students could be really helpful in that online situation.
Thanks, Deb. Just a couple of, some people have said thumbs up when you you asked before about getting some feedback on the presentation, and one person has asked, what adjustments would you make for COVID? I guess in a way you've just answered that, but anything else?
Well, so I think, you know, a lot of the things that we've been working with at ISV, and we've been talking a lot to teachers around Victoria, you know, the big pieces of advice are look after yourself, because teachers are so selfless and so full of heart that they go to the ends of the earth for their students. And it's exhausting being online all day, being able to, you know, having to keep up with all the new technology and platforms. And so it's really important that I think teachers look after themselves so that they can be that really effective teacher online. And the second thing I'm hearing a lot, and I've been reading a lot about, is just that, you know, we just can't expect students to get through as much, and we really have to pare things down. The article I was reading this morning, it said Zoom fatigue is real, and it is. You know, I think we just have to be really coming from that place of kindness, and a little bit less is more at the moment.
And someone has said using a poll would be another good way as well for remote learning.
Brilliant.
And someone says, hinged questions idea is very useful. I was wondering how the teacher can peer students' responses at the classroom when they occur, or collect the responses and inspect them after class.
I think that you could do either. The nice thing about hinged questions being multiple choice is that the kids could just, you know, put, you know, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 up. And so it's that really quick bit of information that if everybody's chosen C, and I've constructed the answer C so that it's a particular thing that I know students are likely to get stuck on, I know that I need to address that right away. Whereas if I collect an exit poll, I'm waiting till the next day to come back to it. And in the meantime, I've probably assigned homework and the kids have gone home, you know, really not sure about that point. So I think using the multiple choice, and just even students, if they do have mini whiteboards, could just write the letter of their response and hold it up. And then you can quickly see what kinds of questions you want to answer straight away rather than wait.
Another question, do you find that children who are less confident do well with paraphrasing a different response?
I think that's a tricky one because, you know, it really does depend on the student. Sometimes that can be difficult because they're trying to tune in, make sense of what that student has said, and then try and come up with a different way of saying it. I think that's a really good one to practice again, maybe with that idea of think, pair, share. So if you're asking students to be good at paraphrasing other students, perhaps build it up, you know, not expecting them to be good at it straight away, but give them some nice, safe ways to get better at it. So, you know, if you ask them to paraphrase something, give them that minute to maybe write a couple of notes or think about what they want to say first. And I think as you build up that culture in your classroom, it's like anything, as you build that beautiful trust and relationships, you can push those boundaries a little bit further each time.
Okay, another question, Deb, is do you think it is important to use strategies consistently over time so they become habituated to them, not to try too much at once?
Oh, I think that is a very beautiful point, because, you know, if we want these things to work well, the students have to get used to it. And of course, we come to class having planned it all out. They might be seeing it for the first time. And, you know, I think sometimes it's easy to say, you know, we as teachers, we have so many strategies and things that we can draw on that, you know, if you go into class and you try something and it falls a bit flat, sometimes it's easy to just throw that away and say, I'll try something different, rather than perhaps, you know, I didn't always think about why didn't that work? Is it just because it's new to the students? Do I need to make some adjustments? Do I need to explain it a little bit more? And then keep trying it, because I think that's really valuable, especially if you know your class and you think, oh, this will work really beautifully, but we have to give it a go. I think a really decent go, and help to build that into a routine in the classroom.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, Chris. No, sorry, no, we don't have time for any more questions, but we've got all your questions here and they can be followed up. So thanks very much, Deb. Over to you.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Katie. Yes, unfortunately, we have to move on. I know there's a lot of interesting discussions there and a lot of engagement, so I'm really happy with that, and we will get back to you. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, which is Gabrielle Quakawoot. She has started up a business called the Art of String Theory. I've had the pleasure of working with Gabrielle through STEM camps and seeing her personally use her string theory to engage students in geometry and shape in general. So Gabrielle Quakawoot is a Baili woman through her mother's lineage, along with Irish, Chinese and Vanuatu heritages. Her father's people are a full Solomon Islander. Gabrielle has been a string finger artist all her life and is the founder of the Art of String Theory. Gabrielle has a postgraduate certificate in Natural, Cultural and Environmental Heritage Interpretation from the Institute of Koori Education. She has also studied Indigenous Environment and Caring for Country 2 and 3 in the Mackay area. Gabrielle now lives her dreaming through her business, the Art of String Theory. A great pleasure to introduce Gabrielle to you, and go for it, Gabrielle.
Great. Hi. Waramuli, Kodor Bandar Gamaburs, O Fayaha Bandarula, Dira Parajajans. So hi, and welcome to the Art of String Theory's presentation at this Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Mathematics Alliance 2020 webinar conference. I'd like to acknowledge with gratitude and a learned heart this Cubby Gubby Gubby land and sea country from where I'm presenting. I acknowledge these creative ancestors, of course, past, present and emerging. You may know the Gubby Cubby country as Sunshine Coast in Queensland. So I am Gold Orang Bunjer, and I acknowledge my mothers in this particular webinar relative to my business. I'm mathematically, artistically, and acknowledging my mother's Baili and Vanuatu heritages and my father's Solomon heritages. So my name is Gabrielle Quakawoot, and I'm the Art of String Theory founder. So as always, string is involved in every piece of every class, every actual literal thing I do in my business. And I usually begin with a story. So I'm going to begin with a story for this presentation to begin introducing you to my first knowledge system, Kamut. Okay. So long ago in the dreaming, in the big Willamette Majimba, there lived a little lizard. And the little lizard would climb all around his bush. The little lizard would look under this rock. And the little lizard would look under that rock. The little lizard climbed over the leaves and under the twigs, the little lizard climbed all around his bush, and the other animals even called him a sticky beak. Until one night, when the stars were shining, the little lizard found a hollow tree log. And even though the little lizard knew the hollow tree log was someone else's home, the little lizard looked in this corner of the tree log, and the little lizard looked in that corner of the tree log. The little lizard looked all around his tree log until, hey, there were two big eyes staring at the little lizard. And the little lizard got such a fright, the little lizard ran all the way to the base of Mount Coolum, where great-grandfather Gumtree lives. And the little lizard crawled in and out up the big roots of great-grandfather Gumtree. The little lizard crawled in and out up the long trunk of great-grandfather Gumtree. The little lizard crawled in and out along the long branches of great-grandfather Gumtree. The little lizard crawled in and out until the little lizard thought he was hidden. And do you know what happened to the little lizard? He forgot his tail was hanging out. So the big owl with the big eyes pecked the little lizard's tail, and the little lizard's tail disappeared. Okay, so this is a story that as a generic story, which I usually start all of my workshops with. And one of the reasons I do that is there's cultural content in there. And there's also natural content in there, because we learn how lizards regrow their tails. And I often use this story to begin the journey of explaining how the art of string theory came to be, and why I'm choosing to use ancient knowledge systems as a way of teaching mathematics. And then there's also the mathematical content. So we have a pentagram. We have, where I'm sure all of you could tell me what shape this was in my talk, which was the hollow tree log. And here we've got more geometrical shapes. So now I've done my introduction, and I'm going to show you how this tail of the art of string theory was regrown. I'm just going to go into my sharing content, so I'll just be hopefully really super quick. Okay, so I've just, of course, my opening page, The Art of String Theory, and I specifically look at ancient arts in relation to infinite Indigenous intelligence. This is a picture taken on Cubby Cubby country with a Cubby Cubby elder in the picture. And this was a Seven Sisters star constellation, which is the connection to my Baili mob, and the ancient knowledge system I carry through that lineage. Okay, so the art of string theory ultimately works with three ancient arts, and they are Kamut, which is the cat's cradle, like the string game that I just played with you, ancient sacred geometric sand art, and Goldor and Bundra light language spectrum. So today we're mostly going to look at the first two. In our 20-minute session, we're going to look at the first two ancient arts. And so these arts were introduced to me as a very small child. And here we have another picture of the Seven Sisters. And so I'm going to introduce you to how maths was shared in my home from very small. And my grandmother was specifically quite, she always played counting games with me. We played string. I played the Kamut string games with everyone. though my grandmother really took this to the next level of mathematics by introducing me to this picture that you see on the screen as a child before I went to school. So this is, yeah. The Kamut was, or the string, Kamut, was, as babies, we had aunties, uncles, cousins coming up, putting shapes in our faces as a part of the cultural heritage I grew up within. And of course, peg buckets. Yes, peg buckets are awesome fun. And so I would find much joy in creating shapes. And what, in hindsight, I find quite interesting is I was always given a cosmic narrative in the sense of my grandmother or some auntie and uncle saying, oh, that's a beautiful sun you've got there, or, oh, look at what star she made today, and so even though it was just, I'm playing with pegs, the narrative that I received in my family was literally cosmic. Kamut, our Kamut string is, my grandmother would actually make shapes like this in the ground that I personally as a child would begin jumping in, singing songs in, doing stretches like that little girl is there, just for fun. And at the time, not realizing the absolute mathematical and scientific connection to this shape, it was literally just a little game we played. And of course, this is the seed of life geometry that I had learned to arc with my grandmother before preschool. Though this knowledge to me was taught telepathically and through mimicking. So there was no, for this particular shape, there was no word except love for me as a child. Other games we'd play growing up, both at home or at the school ground, were, you know, we'd all get petals, 5-petaled flowers, and spin them into flight from a veranda and see who would fly the furthest. Dandelions were like everywhere where I grew up. So we had created an infinite number of dandelion flower games through and blowing games, which trains your eyes to understand the growth of a dandelion. And amongst the many games we played as children, we were the Bernie bean seeds, and we would surprisingly burn people, you know, just with some rubbing the seed on a rock. Okay, so these are just some of the ways my cousins and I experienced maths and science principles at home or in the bush. There are many, many more kinds of these ways. Though, because I'm presenting on the art of string theory, I'd like to move into Kamut, which is the first art I learned, and of course, my first ancient knowledge system. So Kamut is an Eastern Torres Strait word for the game commonly known as cat's cradle or string figures. Kamut was played around me as a baby. Kamut involves a looped piece of string woven between our fingers, thumbs, wrists, teeth, neck, toes, elbows, and even other people's body parts to create shapes. And Kamut shapes both have cultural and mathematical components. For example, this picture here has the 9 diamond shape, which is, so this is a very ancient shape, and it's found in many, many cultures, including Aboriginal culture. And generally speaking, the shape is always interpreting some type of doorway, a meditation, understanding eternity or not of eternity. Though they're all, this particular shape's always connected into, culturally, it's always connected into doorway shapes. So you can see that there's a mathematical component with the 9 diamonds that are actually, when you have a closer look, they're actually fractal diamonds. And this is seeing through the eyes of Kamut. Here are some youths from a STEM camp who loved making pentagrams. And pentagrams are, yeah, they're quite an interesting symbol in many cultures. This is another, I'm now just sort of going to really quickly move into the maths of the string. So here we have a shape that's, I've known this shape since I was in grade 3, I think. And this shape is called a spaceship. And if you look closely, between his thumbs and his mouth, he has 4 triangles. So I'm just going to have a look at the element fire, or the significance of 4 triangles. Another string shape we do is called a 3-prong spear. Now this shape is very much East Coast, like Aboriginal Australia, East Coast to the Torres Straits, Melanesia, and some of Polynesia. And if you can see there are 3. He's got his thumb, his middle finger, and his ring finger, I think he's got there, yeah, and his ring finger, and they create the base of a shape that has that has a tetrahedral nature when you were just looking at the 3 prongs of the spear. And any triangular based pyramid, as we know, is made of 4 triangles. So this is just another shape where we look at the cultural content of this shape as a spear. Sometimes we look at it as a 6-pole tent, depending on the cultural background of the children in my classes. Though I tend to always use Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and Melanesian interpretations as much as possible. And then if we do the exact same finger movements that created our 3-prong spear, which of course had the tetrahedral nature, if we halve our string and do the same finger movements, we create a shape that's known as the emu's foot. Okay, and that's obviously an Australian shape, an Aboriginal shape that I collected in southern in New South Wales. I collected that shape. Now the reason, and now we're going to have a look at, then I connect this tetrahedron, or this tetrahedral nature of that we're creating with a string, literally to nature. And so when you get up close and personal with a grass tree, seed head, after the seed has gone to ground, the open seed pods, as you may be able to see here, form perfect, in this particular point there, you can see the 3 points where you've got a these seed pods create perfect tetrahedrons. So the tetrahedron is connected to fire, which we're going to look at soon. So I ultimately love connecting everyone to nature as much as I can, to become literally up close and personal with nature. And this is a Torres Strait Island shape known as little fishes, and you can definitely see the zigzag. This is a moving picture, but you can see the zigzag nature. A zigzag nature often with so many zigzags, often refers to the icosahedron, which is another platonic solid, and the icosahedron represents the water element. So we begin to highlight how various parts of the string shape are immediately related to platonic solids. Here, so creativity is a massive, massive component of my classes. And this is a girl, after she'd learnt, after a 1-hour session, she's like, she wanted this filmed. And what's the name of the shape? It's an owl. Thank you. Okay. So the shape that this young lady has created is an owl, and you can see the owl nature. So one of the ways that I sort of make sure the children are learning is they have to physically do the shape with their string and tell the narrative. So this particular young girl made the shape, and she then actually began sharing with me personal information to do with owls in her life. So I just thought that was absolutely divine. So we recorded that. This is another original, so this is from the STEM camps. This is another original shape that the children came up with. And it was called arrowhead. So a child comes up with a shape, is able to repeat the shape, and then can teach others the shape, and then the people that they're teaching can then come and share the shape with me. And to me, that the shape and the narrative that they've created, and that for me is the children showing me they're engaging and they're learning. And then of course I might quiz them on, like, well, how many triangles are in this shape? You know, are there polygons in this shape? How many polygons are in this shape? So one of my default questions actually is how many sides are in this shape? How many triangles are in this shape? It's always my default question is how many. I just thought I'd mention that for Deb. It made me think. So Kamut as an ancient knowledge system, and this is just a brief summary of Kamut. The shapes that I share in my workshops include spiritual practices, life cycles, fire making, food collection, insects, transport, weapons, shelter, astronomy, and much, much, much more. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the second ancient art, and of course ancient knowledge system I work with, and this is the ancient sacred geometrical art of drawing circles in the dirt. So a lot of my classroom is on the ground, literally on the sand at the beach, because I love living here where I am at the Sunshine Coast. This particular artwork is actually one of my students' artwork. So this particular chap has been doing string for, I think, maybe 2 hours, and then he you know, one thing led to another, and he created this. Now I'm going to show you I've just got this little video. Okay, so that's me doing, this is how the sacred geometry is created. And as you'll notice, especially in this picture, I've got a red Kamut string for this particular sand art. Though the sacred geometrical sand art is literally constructed with our Kamut string and 2 sticks. And the particular geometry that I've created here is the Seed of Life tube torus. And this geometry is strongly connected to understanding, you know, the torus nature of our electromagnetic fields, though viewed from on top. And yeah, so the tube torus is another, and the Seed of Life are both they can be seen as separate workshops, or I bring them together. In this particular picture, I'm working with a homeschool group, and we are learning how to find a midpoint of an arc, with a piece of string and 2 sticks. And then, of course, you know, then we can start decorating and becoming creative, which is a great space to be in, because that shows that you're truly, truly learning. Coloured stone. So as a child, before chalk was a sort of a popular thing that you could just buy from the supermarket, I would collect coloured stone with my grandmother, and we still do this in my classes today, just to give children, you know, that what it was like in the olden days, apparently. And in the workshops, this is the type of things that children come up with when they, and this is from an ancient geometrical perspective, this is an extremely amazing shape with quite a few interpretations. They're all connected into light, because again, there's a tetrahedral or a 3-base nature to this 2-dimensional shape. And so this is what my resource in my class looks like. I will draw a massive geometry. In this one, I've got our Seed of Life, Flower of Life, and Fruit of Life geometries. And then we begin around this picture drawing smaller versions and finding midpoints, looking at triangles, looking at diamonds, doing shapes with our string, like Kamut shapes with our string, and then geometrical shapes with our string. And this particular grid pattern, shall we say, is the foundation for all of our platonic solids. And so we're looking at a two-dimensional piece of art that is used to create these three-dimensional pieces of art, which is a way that I like to find out if children have learned. If a child has learned, they can walk up with a bunch of art and I can ask them a series of questions like, so what's the code of this shape? And so, you know, and if the child can go, okay, this is the red shape is fire, the name is tetrahedron, it has 4 triangles and the code is 333. If they can ultimately, and then they can pull a few of the fire string shapes, which is those like 3 or 4 fire string shapes. That to me is pure evidence that the child has learnt in my class, because they can do the art and they can speak the narrative. And that's both the cultural narrative and the mathematical narrative. And this is star tetrahedron. So this is another 3. So we move, you know, I like to be extremely like tactile with children. And I love working with intergenerational classes, as that's the way that I learn. And I think in my intergenerational classes, it really brings together parents and children, or grandparents and children, who would have conversations about things that would never happen outside of an intergenerational class. So this is, yeah. So, and this is the ancient, so the star tetrahedron again is an ancient symbol of the harmonic of feminine and masculine light. And then these are my biggest installations that I do. This installation is, I think, 2.5 meters high, and I think around 4.5 meters wide, and is made of bamboo, and it has the 7 sisters. So the oak ring I have today, and a big component of the inspiration, motivation for my business and the starting of the art of string theory is my dreaming connection to the 7 sisters. This was on Makepeace Island, and what was also interesting is how many people who sat in this, because you could fit maybe 20 people in there, is how many people actually sat in that shape and became, and I just got so much gratitude from people who sat in the shape and became more connected to themselves, more connected to the stars, more understanding of what their project was that they were working on. And this was actually for an Earth Tech conference. So there were Indigenous mathematicians and scientists from all around the world who have small business ideas, and all of those businesses are connected into ultimately a sort of a science and maths nature. And so the 7 sisters was an amazing connection that we all had. So I had the 7 sisters conversations with our Pakistanis friends, our Indian friends, some Maoris, some Africans even, where we all were connecting around the stars and science and mathematics. The forms of mathematics I teach, or I have workshops in my business, Bonyi Bonyi, so I have seasonal math art. Bonyi Bonyi is a traditional Aboriginal food that grows, and the Bonyi Bonyi festival, or the Bunya Bunya festival, was always here in the Sunshine Coast in Cubby Cubby Waka Waka country. And I have developed a mathematics of the Bonyi Bonyi math art. So in this picture, we are coding the bunya nut, so finding the Fibonacci code within the bunya nut. We're finding the Fibonacci code in the bunya cone, because this is the cone. And then once we get our 2 numbers, our clockwise spiral and our anti-clockwise spiral, I take our multiplication table and we apply 3 forms of ancient mathematics to that multiplication table till it's just purely a series of dots that we understand. And then we literally begin marking out and connecting the dots. So the picture on the bottom left of your screen is the completed mathematical art of the bunya nut. And that is literally created through articizing, I just made that word up, is through making our multiplication table. We're turning it into an art space. And that's the grid, which you cannot see any of the numbers because I really wanted to accent the art. So this art piece is based on our multiplication table and the Fibonacci code. Okay, so in my maths, in my Gold, Aura and Bundrula programs, I have a lightning maths program which looks at rapid mental calculation. So, you know, so perhaps if a child's sitting in a class and looks a little bit like this, you could think, well, the child's drawing on their skin, which is probably not allowed, and also playing with a piece of string. However, this child is actually doing a form of lightning maths. So the string is there because they literally do a lightning shape and understanding the principles of what the lightning maths is. And then we've got our numbers written on our fingers, and we're doing a form of rapid mental calculation called digital computation. So just these hands that this children has, they have the ability, with the way that the numbers are numbered on here, to do their 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 times table. Like, so there's a patterns in there behind the scenes that, of course, we teach in the class. So it's another way to use string and our fingers to learn stuff, like math stuff. And now I'm just going to move on to the Gold Orang Bundra Gamaburi. So this is the golden rainbow waterlight, which is the 3rd ancient knowledge system I work with. And this is connected immediately to light alchemy, and then, you know, new chakra system. And this works with understanding intuitive and initiative experiences. Quite some of the geometry, like the geometry I have opened onto me today, and the geometry you can see opened onto my leg. The 7 sisters often reveal mathematical codes to me in various ways. So in quite an unusual, intuitive, initiative, experiential way, I receive insights to shape codes that literally come through other dimensions and support my life here. So in this picture here, we have the art of string theory. We have children playing Kamut. We have our Gold Orang Bundrula. We have our Gold Orang Bundrula Gamaburi art piece of our Seed of Life tube torus. And then we also have like the Aboriginal colours with the 7 sisters. So I put this because this is a beauty, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram as the art of string theory. And this picture very much sums up the passion and motivation I have for doing my business. Okay, so in summary, there are 3 points that I would like to add here in summary. So in summary, I think the intelligence and acceptance of our ancient knowledge systems and practices for interpreting our environment is the most revolutionary education experience we can give children, parents, and teachers. It's also a joy during class to see how children are being creative and are empowered with these ancient knowledge systems. So they're learning the culture and the math. And then, of course, just learning through play allows children to create, and they naturally begin creating their own narrative. So the more a child literally makes a shape and then you talk to the child about the shape, you've just created an amazing way for a child to speak their own truth, which I find revolutionary. And that's why I feel that, you know, this learning through play and creating is so significant to the you speak it, you create it. Oh, sorry. So thank you. That's my website. So you can friend me on Facebook or Instagram through Goldorok Bunjur Gummelburi or through The Art of String Theory. And I'm just going to go to my Zoom again because I'm learning tech. Great.
Oh, thanks. Right.
Beautiful.
Finished?
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay,
Yeah, if I got questions, you can ask me.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Look, I'd just like to say thank you for sticking around because we have gone grossly over time. That's not Gabrielle's fault. Since we've actually gone over time with other parts of our session. So it's our first one and we are learning. So again, thanks for sticking around. I'll hand over to Katie for a few questions for Gabrielle. So if you've got any, put it into Q&A and then we'll wrap up. So thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Gabrielle. We've got about five minutes for questions and then we'll wrap it up. And so the first one, somebody wants to know where they can purchase the string materials and where can we learn how to make some patterns with the strings?
Okay, so you can, I'm just going to show you some really quick stuff. So this string, I choose to get the acrylic string from a $2 shop. I've tried more natural fiber strings, unless they're made, like I have a necklace here, you might be able to see. So this is the real true ancient string. That's natural fiber strings, whether they're made of hemp or jute, are nowhere near as strong as our traditional strings. And children are often pulling the string. So I find the $2 strings from the craft shops quite and acrylic string because the children are always pulling the string. The other thing that I'm just going to show you now is the shapes that I do are quite complicated. Though if you're in a classroom, you can begin making triangles, rectangles. You can follow squares. And I'm sure when you begin playing, you can make pentagons and hexagons and septagons and octagons, and you can make so many shapes. And you can, like, for example, a hexagon, you can use your toes, your mouth, and 2 hands. It's about the educator also becoming creative. I literally walked out of the bush to start my business, so I don't have online things that you can buy to teach people. One of the things that I'm severely interested in is perhaps, doing the train the teacher stuff. So teachers can begin to learn. And I feel that because this is an experiential, so ancient arts are experiential, and so that's not something I can give you. I can't give you the experience. So what I can do is just begin to, you can just begin to learn string shapes, and you can do that in many, many places online. I'm slowly getting together a way to do my math and string online. So yeah, if you Google the International String Figure Association, you can learn a lot of string shapes there. There's also on Instagram a lady called Cat's Cradle. She's got, but they have got amazing shapes. Yeah.
Thanks,
I hope that
Gabrielle.
answers your question.
And there's,
yeah.
I guess, there's more information on your website. Erin.
Yeah, there's a website. Yeah.
How long is a piece of string? How long is a Kamut string?
That's a very good question. A Kamut string. So the Kamut in my workshops, and the more you meet Kamut artists, that you'll find everyone has different ways. So my Kamut strings that I work with are my arm length. So the string's measured from the tip of my finger through to my shoulder, and that's twice the length, and then it's tied off. And then we also work with a long string, which is 4 times our arm length. Other friends of mine that do string that come from different cultures or different parts of Australia, they use from their nose to their fingers. Some people use this double span. And the more you understand the art form, which takes time for you to play, even as an educator, you just have to sit and play. You'll find that some shapes you can do with a small string and other shapes you need much longer strings. So generally speaking, relative to proportionate mathematics and your hand size, that is why I use this particular, because I work with little tiny children, and you cannot give a child a string this big. If you measure that particular length, then the string is always going to be proportionate to the size of the child's hand, so they'll be able to pull the shape. Very good question, by the way. Yeah.
And so much really interesting maths. I think we need to finish there. And any other questions will be answered via email. Thank you so much, and over to you, Chris.
Yeah, look, we have to wrap up. I'd like to thank both our speakers, Deb Carmichael and Gabrielle Quakawoot. So thank you very much, and please do your virtual applause. I can hear them right now.
It's okay. No.
What also I'd like to say is that you could see that both speakers come from quite a different perspective when they're teaching and learning of mathematics. So in your group or individually, I'd like to encourage you to think through what you've heard today and look at connections between those two. I'd like to also say that our next webinar is going to be on Tuesday, the 27th of October, 2020 at 4 to 5 p.m. Hopefully it'll be 5 p.m. We'll try and stick to it. This will be done, the two speakers we have for that next one is Emeritus Professor ATSIMA, who will be realising best practice in mathematics education. And we also have Nicole Boyd, who's worked up at with the Walpi people at Laramanu to look at two-way dialogue on the desert raisin in a female Indigenous middle years class, continuing towards cultural inclusivity in mathematics curriculum and pedagogic practice. What will happen too is there's going to be a survey at the end of this, so please spend the time to fill in the survey. It'll only take you about 2 minutes. And again, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for coming, and look forward to seeing you at the next ATSIMA seminar. So our online conference, I should say. So see you next time. Thank you.